Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back from the break. Thank you for joining us for the next session of Through the Noise. My name is Craig Sales, and I'm the head of IT for Allan Gray. Today, we're diving into a topic that is top of mind for many: cybersecurity and what it means for retirement savers and their administrators. On the 16th of May in 2024, the Financial Sector Conduct Authority and the Prudential Authority jointly published what is known as Joint Standard 2 of 2024. Titled Cybersecurity and Cyber Resilience. The standard became effective in June of this year. Before we dive in, I wanted to provide a brief summary of the standard. The joint standard we're looking at today is deliberately broad. It applies to banks, insurers, retirement funds, fund administrators, collective investment scheme managers, and a range of other regulated financial institutions. At its heart, it's about safeguarding not only your clients, but also the resilience and sustainability of your own business. Cybersecurity threats and IT disruptions are becoming more frequent and more sophisticated, and regulators are increasingly focused on ensuring that firms can manage these risks responsibly. Put simply, the standard lays down minimum requirements to help financial institutions anticipate, withstand, recover from, and adapt to cyber attacks or IT failures. While it sets out the baseline, it also signals a direction of travel, encouraging all of us in the industry to build stronger operational resilience, no matter the size or type of business that we run. I'm joined today by three brilliant cybersecurity industry experts, with whom I look forward to unpacking this important industry topic. On my right is Anna Collard, and is a Senior VP of Content Strategy at KnowBe4 Africa, which is an awareness platform. She's a leading authority on cybersecurity awareness, training, and human risk management. In the middle, we have Andrew Henwood. Andrew's a founder and director at BlckRhino. He's an expert in cyber defense, detection, and third-party risk management. And then right on the end is Katlego Masemola. Katlego is the founder and executive director at Orion Cyber. They specialize in strategy, governance, and building cyber resilience into organizations. Firstly, thank you all for joining me today. I look forward to this interesting topic and discussion. Andrew, we'll start with you in the middle. Let's start with, what do you think motivated the FSCA and the PA to release the standard now? Why at this stage have they come out with this?
I think, Craig, if we go back in time, I've been doing incident response and forensics for a fairly lengthy period. And dare I say, over the last couple of years, things have not been getting better. If anything, they've been getting slightly worse. And I think this is a global phenomenon we've seen in the more developed countries across the world. And I think Southern Africa took the approach that we need to do something too. There are a number of these frameworks and cybersecurity and cyber resilience frameworks which have come to the fore overseas. And I think it was our time to take a stance, to motivate the various industries it's targeting, to really look at this in a more mature fashion, to really ensure that we take cognizance of the issue. These organizations are targets, and we need to be doing more as a collective.
Great. Katlego, over to you. As I mentioned, this standard is broad and it covers a wide range of firms. I mean, how do you see smaller businesses, a small business, a small practice with maybe 5 or 10 people? How do you see them complying and dealing with the requirements of the standard?
Yeah, thank you, Greg, and welcome to everyone. I think from the smaller businesses, what the standard allows, it has the little almost agility, in terms of the minimum requirements that at least some of these businesses can put forward. The standard really aims to ensure that there are protection measures that will also help the organizations themselves. And this is why it's quite important that whether big or small, the adaptation and adoption of these standards and some of the requirements in the is quite key, right? So for small organizations, it's always important to look at some of the key features in the standard, having a response plan as an example, quite important, to say this is how we will respond in the event of an incident. Thanks.
Anna, any thoughts?
Yeah, I must say I really love the fact that we have this standard. And it's not from a compliance point of view, but because it's the right thing to do. To give you an example, like I think the statistics to catch the flu is it 23% or something? You're more likely to become a victim of cybercrime than catching the flu, because it's so bad. Not just in South Africa, as Andrew said, it's a worldwide phenomena. But it's important that as a financial services industry, we, not just the big guys, but everyone that's involved appreciates that particularly the elderly generations, unfortunately, are being targeted at scale, automated fashion, really in sophisticated ways, and not because they, if you think about, elderlies have access to pension funds and retirement funds, and that's what the criminals want. They're in it for the money, right? So we have to make sure that we protect the consumers as well as the organizations that manage those funds.
Great. Can we move on to data security? So the standard focuses and spends quite a lot of time talking about data security. And how do you? What are some of the practical ways that you think that financial institutions need to adopt to ensure the safety of client data?
So as Katlego mentioned, there are some practical non-negotiables in the standard. And what I like about it is it gives you like a roadmap of things that you have to do. For example, you need to introduce multi-factor authentication, which is just a second layer of, authenticating users to sensitive data. What that means is it's not just a username and password, which is no longer, even if you have strong, long passwords, it's not enough. You need to add that second layer of authentication. Often it's just it's like an app on your phone, or maybe you have a dongle. There are certain non-negotiables with regards to your governance structure. So even in a small business, if you only have 5 people, you have to assign somebody who's responsible for cybersecurity, and preferably in a committee kind of way. You need to assign somebody from external, preferably, to do at least an annual review or penetration test, as we call it, to make sure that the controls that you have in place are actually functioning. And then what I'm particularly personally excited about is that there's a section in the standard that talks to the people issue. Because let's face it, cybersecurity is as much about psychology as it is about technology. Because in nearly most cases, when there's a exploitation, when there's a compromise, a data breach, it often starts with a human that clicks on something they shouldn't be clicking on, that shares something they shouldn't be sharing on over the phone. And Craig, these attackers are becoming so sophisticated using AI that makes them sound like you, for example, right? Like if I use deepfake technology, I can impersonate you. So we have to make sure that we train the users, the people themselves, especially the executives, by the way, and the board members, to understand the level of risk that their data and their organizations are facing, and then how to prevent it, and how to also be aware of our own psychology in that.
Andrew, so how would you see this? There's obviously, as we add things like multi-factor authentication and changing passwords more often, there's a barrier there, and it creates a little bit of friction. How do you see this, and how do you think the standard kind of addresses this?
So Craig, I'm actually going to go back to your previous question. You mentioned data security, and I'll lead into this, what you've just asked now. I think what I really love about this Joint Standard 2 framework that's come about, and look, please don't shoot me, the compliance people are not going to love this comment, but this is now a mandated compliance requirement. It's not optional. If you're part of the scope of the Joint Standard 2, you were required to be compliant. I think it was the 2nd of June of this year. So it's not optional. You need to do it if you fall within scope. Now, what I've seen this do is it's created a perception within those organizations and a recognition that they handle sensitive data, sensitive client data. And in so many cases, I've been to organizations where they literally don't even know where their sensitive data is. And talking about protecting your data, that's the one big thing that the Joint Standard does, is it gives you that recognition that you are handling sensitive data and you need to treat it with due care. And there's a bunch of technology requirements which surround that. Now, by maturing an organization's approach to how they handle that sensitive data leads us into your question now. So I think, look, no one said cybersecurity would be easy, but we're all as strong as the weakest link. And what the joint standard is definitely doing is it's putting the responsibility on the larger organizations to take a mature approach around cybersecurity and really do whatever they possibly can to encourage similar cybersecurity behavior within their client base. Now, it is always going to be a challenge to get gran and grandpa to use two-factor authentication. Just as Anna said, cybersecurity is a people problem as much as it is a technology problem. Unfortunately, there's no other way to put this, but we all have a duty of care to educate the more vulnerable, the less educated. We need to encourage them to be more secure. If we don't do that, we're going to get ourselves into a mess. And we know there are situations, many situations in the work that we do where we see ordinary moms and dads, grands and grandpas, they're getting scammed. They're losing their hard-earned money. And the great thing what the Joint Standard 2 does is it ensures that these organizations are educating their clients. And I think that is a huge win. It's not going to be easy. Two-factor authentication, to pick the example, is a complex matter. But I think us on this panel are fairly au fait with how it works. We need to make sure mom and dad know how to do this too, how gran and grandpa can do this too, and we need to encourage that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
Thank you. Katlego, whilst we're on data security, email, like the majority of our correspondence with our clients is via email, and with our advisors is via email. I mean, how do you see that going forward? I mean, I'm sure all of us have noticed that, lots of our communications with, our medical aids, everything is starting to move towards, encrypted documents and passwords. I mean, do you see that? Is that really the way forward? Do you think we get to a point where every communication that we have with our financial institution is password protected? That obviously introduces quite a lot of friction. Are there better ways of doing things?
Yeah, look, I think going forward, we're going to see more controls come in place. So at the back of the standard, it's really coming from a requirement where we are saying what is an asset to an organization. So this asset can be data, it can be people, can even be the various technology and the processes that we implement. So before we even get to an email, for data, we then need to say, what is data here? So if we are having conversations like this and we are at a board session, all the information that is being exchanged there is sensitive. It's very important. So we then need to say, how do we protect that? In our meetings with things like your AI readers, how do we protect that, right? So the identification of everything that is an asset for your organization becomes very key, and it's foundational. Right? And then once we have that, then we can bring in the technologies that then say, how do we respond? The email one, very important. If you look at email, it contains a basic thing like your name, your surname. That's personal information. It contains your email address. It contains your cell phone number or any cell phone or telephone numbers. That also becomes very important. So those have even other data requirements. So it becomes quite important to then say, how do we then protect such information? So we are going to see more and more. If you look at our statements from the municipalities, they must have, so similar to our bank statements and our grant statements, if benefits with insurance providers, they must have those various protections. So we are only going to see more, but they will be better. Data minimization also, so we must find a way to identify Greg without using his name. That's going to be quite important, especially in the security space for the data elements. Thanks.
Great. The final question on data. We already have the POPI Act, and that's that's a comprehensive act and requirements. Where do you see there's obviously some overlap with things like data classification. Like where do you see the commonalities, and is this going to push more and more requirements around how we handle and classify data?
Yeah, we are going to see more of that, and I think our regulator is quite active in terms of responding to the various requirements. So as and when they are picking up a new risk, they are actively responding, holding on those workshops. So we are going to see more and more. So the overlap, almost even not even an overlap, a convergence between the privacy aspect and the security aspect is quite important.
Great.
Can I jump in there?
Sure.
I just want to mention, I agree completely with what you were saying. I think what's interesting is the joint standard, and I've seen this complaint for folks who undergo compliance in a previous life. The joint standard doesn't do anything revolutionary. All the classification methods are all based on best practice. So they all come from other cybersecurity frameworks. Sure, it's very much focused on the financial services type industry, but there's nothing crazy different to any of the other cybersecurity frameworks out there. And I think that was a very wise move for the folks who built the standard to not make it its own thing, which is very difficult to comply with. And the compliance folks would complain that I already have to do all this over here for Poppy, and now I've got to do this for joint standard too, because they're loosely aligned.
They actually help each other.
Yeah.
Poppy just says you have to implement adequate safeguards. As a law, it doesn't tell you how to do that. And then the standard actually tells you, well, what is that? How do you do it? Those are the non-negotiables that you have to implement. So they complement each other.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to just comment on was about email in particular. It's a bit of a pet project for me. Email has been around since the infancy of the internet. So we're talking early 90s, literally when the internet was invented. And unfortunately, email security has not evolved. And I think it's a very important fact that we should all appreciate, that email should be inherently considered insecure. Anything you put in email is in clear text, and can be read by anyone. It's not an encrypted protocol. Now, to try and fix this, we're seeing the evolution of people now encrypting, and I use this in inverted commas, encrypting the PDFs that they get sent to us. But I'll look around the room. I don't know, what are you using to decrypt your PDFs? Is it your ID number?
It's typically ID number.
ID number.
Which, unfortunately, your ID number is pretty much public. The amount of data breaches we've had in South Africa, the deeds office, things like that. Quite frankly, my personal opinion, and full disclaimer, this is my personal opinion, encrypting a PDF of sensitive information using my ID number is almost pointless, because it would be trivial. If you look on the dark web, I could find anyone in South Africa's ID number, and you'd be able to decrypt it. Yeah. So going back to your original comment, if you're sending inherently sensitive information, you should find a good way, a decent way for protecting that information if it's being delivered via email. Yeah. Quite frankly, encrypting it in a PDF using your ID number, I don't think is the right way forward. Sure, it's a stopgap, and I'm sure we can come up with some more clever ideas in the future. But please, if there's one thing we take away from this session, is to educate the folks out there, is email is not secure. If you're sending anything via email, your bank details, your bank statements, whatever it is, do not consider that as a secure mechanism of transmission.
Great, thanks, Andrew. Andrew, before we started the panel, you were talking about some of the work that you do in the incident response. If we look at the standard also covers response and recovery, which in some ways is an acknowledgement that that bad things will happen and that incidents will happen. What would you expect to see in a company's incident and response or remediation plan?
Great question. So again, I've been involved in incident response for probably 25 years. And let's look at the standard specifically. It talks about the fact that you need an incident response plan. I can't tell you how many organizations phone me and say, help, we've had an issue. And you can tell straight away that they don't know what to do. They didn't know who to call. They didn't have a plan, or they if they had a plan, they dusted it off and they unpacked it and they hadn't looked at it in over a year, and they're literally running around like headless chickens. So the stark reality is that before we had these compliance frameworks like the Joint Standard 2, this was considered a nice to have, and we certainly were not seeing that the majority of the organizations were actually writing up a plan, developing a plan, practicing that plan, and executing on it in their time of need. So I think it's a great thing that the standard is now emphasizing the need for this incident response plan itself. And I've kind of touched on some of these aspects already. What should be in that plan? First and foremost, it needs to have a very clear recipe of what to do in your time of need. So if you detect even a seemingly insignificant incident, how does that get escalated up the chain? How do you handle it? How does it get up to the board level? How do you engage with your legal teams if they need to be invoked? How do you determine the extent of the breach? How do you involve marketing if people start phoning you? There are many facets you need to kind of work through as part of that incident response plan. And what is probably the most imperative thing about this incident response plan is that it's practiced. So you need to ensure that once you've developed your plan and everyone's bought into it, is that you run a simulation. So that the plan itself needs to require that you run simulations of the plan. Because if you run a simulation, it's like a fire drill. And you can take lessons learned from that so that in your time of need, and we in cybersecurity have a saying, it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it will happen at some point. You will have an issue. Even if it's not your fault, it may be one of your customers inadvertently leaking information. So the important thing is, when this does happen, your plan needs to be so well practiced, so well dispersed around the organization, it needs to be almost automatic behavior in how you react to that plan being executed. And it needs to be a living, breathing plan. Katlego, I'm sure you've done many board presentations talking about kind of incident response plans, development practices, and all that kind of good stuff. Maybe you can comment.
Yeah, so I think one of the critical things that we want to see in a plan, as an example, is who communicates, as an example, right? So it must be a coordinated effort between security and management, right? And why this am I emphasizing this is that most of the time we are seeing, especially here in South Africa, people will go online and tell the whole world what broke down. And if you look at what the Joint Standard are saying, and this is what has been practiced also, best practice and globally accepted, it says that only ensure that you notify those that are necessary. But in South Africa, you get instances where people go and say, our firewall was taken down. Now, I know as an ethical hacker what is weak in that organization. I can go again and go implement my other user, and this becomes very easy. Don't be going around saying our firewall was broken, our IDS did not work. That's not important. You have specific people that you must notify, and only notify those people using the channels that have been established. Right, so it's very important that as we are practicing, doing the trainings with Anna, we are fundamental and making sure that we embed those principles. Right, CEOs go, especially in government, I've seen CEO or somebody head would go out and then say, this is what has broken down. We do not want to do that. And this is why it's important that we read what the standards actually require. If you look at it, as Andrew was saying, it's really coming from best practice. ISO 27001 emphasizes everything that is in the standards. So it's now the coordination and mapping in order to put it together.
If I can jump in there quickly, because
Sure.
I think you've really made me jog my thought process here. So one of the requirements of the Joint Standard is that you're able to respond to a major incident and report it. I think it's within 24 hours, if I'm not mistaken. And in incident response and forensics, we talk about the golden hour. So I know it's 24 hours in the Joint Standard, but the quicker you can respond and identify that something's gone wrong, the quicker you can get the representative parties that can help mitigate the issue involved, the quicker you can identify root cause and the quicker you can contain the issue.
Yeah.
So again, one of the fantastic things I love about the joint standard is it now puts a marker in the sand which says if you have an incident, you've got 24 hours to really react.
Yeah.
You know, get on top of this issue, work out what needs to be done, and this is better for everyone because if you can get on top of this quicker, it really mitigates the issue, you know, in a far more better capacity.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. So I'm sure one of the questions on many of our smaller advisors' minds is, you know, how do I implement some of this in my own business? If I'm a small business of 5 or 10 people, I may not have a dedicated IT person. I may have outsourced some of the IT functions to another company. Can you practically outsource some of this, or is this something that management, irrespective of the size of your business, needs to take control of?
So great question. We actually see this coming up quite often. So the joint standard, one of the fundamental things it kicks off with right at the beginning is ensuring that the organization takes responsibility at a board level, that they will implement the joint standard to. Beyond that, everything can be outsourced. And, you know, I would encourage any smaller organization, I'm going to make, you know, no bones about it. You know, cybersecurity resources are scarce. And because there's scarcity, it means they are expensive. You know, I hate to say. But what the joint standard doesn't say, it doesn't say you need a dedicated full-time cybersecurity professional 24/7 working for you. It doesn't require that. It highlights some key critical and fundamental technology requirements, incident response processes, etc. All of those can be outsourced. And my fellow panelists, I'm sure you'll agree, there are many organizations out there who offer fractional CISO services, so fractional cybersecurity professionals who can come in, even if you could get a person in for 1 to 2 hours a month to build your initial framework, do your initial gap analysis, work out what you need to do, help you with your outsourcing capabilities. This is very achievable. Yeah. The standard does not require, you know, a full-time person. And I've seen this in the past with other standards where small organizations throw their hands up in the air and go, oh, this is just impossible to do and we're not going to do it. I hate to say, those are often the organizations that give us a call who've suffered an incident because they're not on top of things.
All right.
So as a small organization, it is certainly achievable. You can outsource literally everything as long as your management, your board has taken cognizance of their responsibility, their essentially fiduciary duty to take good care of the data, of the sensitive information that they're handling, as well as their clients' data.
Katlego, you do a lot of advisory work. I mean, since this joint standard has come into effect, I mean, have you seen a large uptick in requests to do advisory work? And coupled with that, when you go into a business now and you have a look, what's your sense of, you know, how well are we faring? Because, you know, the standard is in effect already. And while the Prudential Authority and the FCSA haven't yet started doing audits, or not to my knowledge, you know, this is going to come at some point.
Yeah, and I think maybe if I'm to take it from the previous question, one of the key things the standard says is that once the board is accountable, but also oversight may be delegated. So this is the exact words that they use, meaning that you can assign anyone, right? So this becomes quite important. When we look at the market currently, a lot of what the standard requires, as we've been saying, was things that were there already. If you look at any big organization that is using frameworks such as your COBIT or your ISO, I know the banks, they are regulated from a PCI, so a lot of the controls are already there and defined, right? And from then the smaller guys is then the composition to say, how do I put all of this together? In the cybersecurity space, we've gotten a bit creative. We've created what we even call virtual CISOs, where we can then use or put together a fraction of the services and then be able to produce some of the expected documents, governance in place. So from the big guys, I think they were already there because it was a requirement somewhere. For the smaller guys, we've seen, well, from my side, since last year, we've gotten a lot of requests, and we are assisting some of the guys just from an advisory to say, let's map, let's package this for your type of an organization with your size. So there is an uptake. I think we will see the real results once there's implementation and investigation in terms of the authorities to say, let's see how we've been doing. But the foundational controls, I think a lot of the organizations, big and small, have really been trying to implement them.
Great, thank you. Can we turn our attention and focus to training and awareness? I know this is a topic that you spend a lot of time on. Mm-hmm. Can you just talk us through, how should financial institutions go about doing training, and maybe think about across the range of sizes of businesses, because business like ours is certainly different from a small advisory practice. How do we ensure that everybody is getting the right level of training?
Yes, so I want to, before I do that, I'd like to just, if you look at the standard, and the standard actually specifies you shall train your staff in cybersecurity, and you shall do that at least on an annual basis, which, by the way, in my opinion, is not enough at all. And you shall train your governance board. And I think that's where we have to start, right? And even if in a small environment, if you only have 5 people, and you now say, well, the 2 board members are the governance board and they're responsible for making sure this gets implemented, it's important to start there and do some sort of basic training so that they understand not just the standard and the compliance requirements, because that's one thing, is to check the tick in a box. But actually, we want to do all of this. And the reason the standard is here, because we are under attack, right? We want to protect the business and our customers. In terms of rolling it out across, like let's call it a medium or smaller an organization, to do, as I mentioned, to do an annual compliance-based training, that won't help. And I'm going to illustrate this just by a little story, if you don't mind. So I've been in cybersecurity nearly as long as Andrew, so 20 years. And the last 10 years I've just spent in training people on how to, not click on phishing emails, how to spot scams, and all of this. Like, literally, I've spent 10 years doing that. And then about 2-3 years ago, I was sitting in an Uber car. I was driving here in Cape Town to my workshop to pick up my own car. It was after dark. I was talking to the driver. I was packing my bags, and I was checking my emails at the same time. And I kid you not, in that particular moment, I received an Uber-themed phishing email. And me, as the security expert that I am, that specializes in training, what did I do? I clicked on the link.
Did it?
I did. And then as a consequence, I had to take training that I've developed myself. Luckily, this phishing email was just a simulation, it was just a test.
Yeah.
But what I found interesting about that is, and I started a whole rabbit hole of research, is even the best of us, the best trained of us, can fall for these kind of scams or social engineering attacks, as they're called, when we're distracted, when we're multitasking, when we're in a state of what the psychologists call halt, hungry, angry, lonely, tired. If you're in that state of mind, you will get manipulated. So it's very important, and this is something that the smallest of the organizations can do, because it is more about psychology than technology, is to stand up in front of your staff or during lunch, talk to them about these scams, talk to them about the psychological tactics that these scammers are using. Tell them, look, before you react to anything, particularly when it's related to investments, to money, to bank account changes, take a breather before you react. Literally, it's like taking that breather and going into a state of rational thinking rather than impulse and emotional sort of triggering, which is often what the scammers will try and get you to. And that is what I call digital mindfulness, and it goes beyond your annual compliance-based cyber training. It's something that we have to hone as a life skill. Even with our kids, like, this is no longer, we all are digital all the time, right? So we have to practice this sort of vigilance or awareness throughout when we whether it's offline, online world, we're digital all the time. And just to use, I'm sorry for indulging me, but like another story that explains this maybe in an easier way is, I live in Cape Town, and when I travel to Joburg, probably it's a bias because Cape Town is probably just as dangerous, but somehow I feel quite safe walking around in Cape Town. But when I arrive in Joburg, I automatically become more vigilant. I put my handbag on the like the floor of the car at the robots. I double check. I'm not stressed or paranoid. I'm just more vigilant. And this is where we need all of us to be when we're interacting in online spaces that are related to finance, bank accounts, personal information, sensitive information. So anyway, long story short, it's not enough to just do an annual training, guys. Like, please do. And you don't need expensive products and whatever. There's content on YouTube en masse. Talk to your staff about it. My husband used to run a company with about 100 staff. He never bought my training products. He just stood there every Friday at their staff meetings and he told them about the latest scams. He sent out fake phishing emails to train them. And if you want more help, obviously there are companies that help with that. But it's important to take this seriously because most scams start with a human. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. So, what would you say is the right cadence that the training should take place with staff and then I guess importantly the board?
So I think I completely agree with what Anna says. Once a year, it's going to go in one ear, out the other, and you're going to get on with your day job, which is super busy for all of us, including the board, and it'll come around quicker than you think, and you're into the next year, and you've missed out on all this reinforcing education. So I'm a huge fan, as obviously as Anna, and I'm sure Katlego. I'm a huge fan of reinforced learning. So, look, I'm not death by PowerPoint, and I don't want to force my staff through countless videos of trying to hammer in the message around cybersecurity. I want to show them. I want to talk to them about that phishing email that I received. I want to tell them about Anna's story. I want to emphasize that we're all human, and the humans are the weakest link.
Yeah.
So if you can continually bring in these elements of reality, we're quite fortunate because, as I mentioned, we do incident response and forensics. So we see stuff on the coalface. We see what the threat actors are doing today that is incredibly advanced. They are so clever at the way they craft their emails and their communications. And with AI, it's only getting worse.
Yeah.
So it's not just about the training. It's about reinforcing the behavior of the threat actors, thinking like they think, being consciously vigilant, to coin Anna here, to make sure that you are conscious that when I receive this email from my financial advisor, is it really from my financial advisor? How can I double check this? Maybe let me ping him on WhatsApp or give him a call and just make sure, why is he asking me to transfer R1 million of my, my Provident Fund to this location? Just be consciously vigilant. And that's where I say the training, it's not just a simple answer saying train once a month, because it's not just about training. It's about reinforcing that behavior to show people how they can go wrong. And I'm sure Allan's got comments on this.
Yes, I have quite a lot of data that I could share or research that tells you, there's the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve, for example. That Ebbinghaus was like a researcher that said, if you learn a lot of stuff once, it might be in your awareness and then you forget about it. Rather, break it up into little chunks and do more frequent sort of the cadence that you said, more frequent repetition of the content. And in terms of training, the data that we looked at across all our customers is the most effective ones are actually not the ones who very frequently train. You can also overtrain people. If you force them every month to do training, that's too much. However, you can every month at least do a monthly sort of refresher. It could just be a mailer or a short little video. And then what's more important is to do very frequent, preferably weekly, phishing simulations. Organizations that do that, like monthly training and weekly phishing simulations, have the best, what we call, fish-prone percentage. So the human vulnerability surface goes way down. And phishing simulations is this thing that happened to me with the Uber. So in our case, we get 2 phishing simulations every week. And by now, I'm so drilled with it that I can see it, I report it, and that's the behavior you want to achieve, right? It's not a lot of, people think, oh, what, twice a week? That takes too much time. It doesn't. You see it, it takes a few seconds, you report it. And that actually helps people to create the right behavior. Also, just something from a research point of view to add to that is there's this thing called the prevalence effect that comes into place when people never see phishing scams. Like, of course, you want to have the technical solutions in place to prevent them from ever seeing the real stuff so that they don't get exposed to it. However, if they never see anything, they don't know how to act with it. So that's where the simulations are important, to expose them to safe, but like sort of scam impersonation emails that will help them to train what to do in the fact that the real thing does eventually get through.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned phishing and measuring phishing response rates. Katlego, are there other ways that you can measure effectiveness? Because obviously this is this is not something that this is not a tick box approach. But how do you know that you are being effective in your training and your awareness?
Yeah, I think importantly you must have a cybersecurity program that then overall you're able to tick off, right? Key matrices, so you can see with the number of incidences that are coming up in your organization, the number of people who are clicking or not clicking. Some of the exercises, especially that we run with the boards, so when there's a rate change, as an example, we'd run a simulation that says, with this rate change, please see your new statement and how it reflects in the financial institutions. And you'd still find some people at a very senior level. These are people who are information workers, as we call them. They are still putting in, they are not looking, right? Mm-hmm. And this then becomes important. It shows that some of the measures annual are not so effective. And also ensuring that we are training at the right level. So an information worker versus a non-information worker. So if somebody does not work on a laptop every day, right, they might just still be that person that brings in a memory stick and then tries to print things. That increases the risk. So ensuring that we are training right, it does tell us the effectiveness of our program. Training at the right level, very important, and also having clear matrices that then tell you to say, how are we effective? So would we see with the number of instances, cybersecurity instances, exposures, or the various weaknesses or vulnerabilities in the organization? So you can define specific key matrices that then help to say, have you protected or not protected your data effectively? So there are a number of those.
Great, thank you. Can we turn our attention to third parties? So, I mean, most IT businesses, or most businesses, will rely to some extent on third parties. To what extent are do those third parties need to comply with the joint standard? And how do we ensure that there's enough due diligence? How do you ensure that the third party that you're relying on is doing what is required within the ambit of joint standard 2?
Yeah, and I'll go back to the ISO, right? So if you look at ISO, what ISO was saying to us, ensure that protection level that you implement are equal to what your third parties are implementing. And if you now go into the standards, they are saying that you need to ensure that third parties that you are dealing with, they follow the due diligence or the necessary controls are implemented in their organizations. And this is what organizations are still not seeing correctly, because we have seen with a number of organizations, especially even globally with the other incidents around that very big organization, I can't mention it, right, where the whole world was affected due to a third-party change that was implemented, right? So it's still a very big risk area. We are not having the right assurance and due diligence around third parties. It still needs to be looked at. And traditionally would put, as and when in the assurance space, when we try to look at third parties, they would then give us a SOC report that says this third party has implemented mandatory controls. But that's not enough anymore. We need to ensure that as we onboard, we do our own due diligence that then ticks off all of these areas. I think, Andrew, you deal with a lot of incidences that are coming because of third parties. You've seen that a lot, right?
Absolutely. So, third-party risk management is a fundamental component of the joint standard 2, as you rightly cite. And you always got to remember, and it's a very good reason that it's in the standard, is because we are inherently only as secure as our weakest link. So if we're an organization who falls into scope of the joint standard and we use a service provider who's handling that sensitive data on our behalf and they are breached, in turn that means we're breached because they're part of our chain of custody, if you like. So it's of imperative importance that as an organization that falls into scope of joint standard 2, you take appropriate and you perform appropriate due diligence on your third parties who are handling that sensitive data, and you ensure that they are maintaining the same levels of information, cybersecurity, cyber resilience as you are, because you don't want them to be your weakest link. And dare I say, as I've mentioned before, many of the breaches we've investigated have been caused by third parties, not the brand name that's reported in the press. Remember, the press is never going to say, oh, it was company X's third-party provider they hired for a one-off event. The press is going to say brand X was compromised. So it's so important that you really take appropriate due care around your third parties. And we see a maturing approach happening. In the past, folks were very reliant on sending out questionnaires. Have you got a SOC 2 report? Are you ISO compliant? Yes, you are. Great, job done. The thing is that's not very empirical.
Yeah.
And we have found that people don't tell the whole truth. So there's a lot more due diligence going into third-party risk management now, with the use of automation tools to make sure that people are doing what they say they're doing. The great thing with this approach is it ensures that everyone is sharing the risk responsibility.
Yeah. And I just wanted to add, to say to Anna, are you even seeing some of these third parties trained at the right level? Because we never get that, but you can tell us, from our experience, the third parties are not trained. I don't know, Anna, any data that side?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, some of the more mature organizations, they do actually, they make, particularly the compliance training, again, it's a requirement for their third parties. But on the other hand, if I think about, some of the smaller organizations, it will be very, very difficult for small organizations to enforce some requirement onto a big service provider, right? So there, I think it's important that they do look at some of those automated tools that Andrew mentioned, or just the general reputation of those, third-party providers, because as a five-man show, you don't have the same clout as, for example, Allan Gray or a big organization has necessarily to go to these service providers, right?
And if I can actually just comment on this, is a very interesting thing that we've floated here. You need to remember, for third-party risk management, if I'm a large organization like Allan Gray, I've got many third-party providers. You know what? The large organization wants their third parties to do the right thing. And you will often be surprised if you're a smaller organization, a vendor to one of these large providers, the large providers will help you mature your level of security.
True.
Yeah.
So there shouldn't be an adversarial type relationship. Yeah. Remember, everyone's sharing the risk here. We want to do the right thing. We all want to protect our customers. And I'm telling you now, your vendor doesn't want to be the source of a breach.
Yeah.
He's doing it the best he can. He may not have the budget, but I encourage all of those smaller vendors and those smaller entities who fall within scope of Joint Standard 2, reach out to the larger vendors, the larger entities. They may have support programs that can help you.
And training program often.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is we're all in this together. This is, I always like saying, we talk about co-opetition in our industry. We're largely competitors, but we work together because we're trying to uplift security right across the board.
Sure. Thank you, Andrew. We're getting close to out of time. I know we could probably spend another hour talking about security, but we are close to out of time. Anna, any final thoughts? I know you've already shared some practical tips and security and social awareness tips. Any passing or final comments for the audience?
Yeah, I think my most pressing one is don't do it for the compliance. It's there because it's the right thing to do. And remember that cybersecurity is as much about our psychology as it is about technology.
Great. And Andrew?
I think my biggest two takeaways are, please, folks, remember email is not secure. If you're attaching sensitive information to your email, be naturally suspicious, be careful of how you share that. And I think the other thing we've just talked about is third-party risk. Third-party risk, you're all part of the ecosystem. We're all in this together. Leverage off your larger colleagues, your larger vendors, your larger clients, and you'll be surprised what you can do, and we can do some great things becoming more secure.
Katlego?
Yeah, I think from my side, I always say cybersecurity is asset management, and it's everyone's responsibility. So we just need to deal with it, ensure that we are managing our assets fully. Thanks.
Great. Finally, thank you for joining us today, and thank you to our panelists for sharing their insights. I'm sure we all agree that this regulation isn't about adding red tape, but rather about protecting clients' money, data, and trust. When your product providers comply with Joint Standard 2, it lowers the risk of disruptions or losses from cyber incidents, giving you and your clients more confidence in the system.